Within days, Madeleine's face fueled one of the largest international searches for a missing child in history.
Madeleine's face became so familiar. She became ubiquitous.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
It was heartbreaking because photographs were released that the family had taken on that holiday.
It's obviously extremely difficult.
Every day, me and my team were there. We just watched the press pack grow and grow and grow.
And of course, the McCanns didn't want that. They didn't want the press pack to grow and grow and grow, and they had nothing to do with the press pack growing and growing and growing, didn't they? Hello, and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. The secret scoop of a lifetime. And that is really the epilogue of this article that we've been analyzing in The Independent. And this one article, in a way, is an analogy for the entire McCann case, and also the way that the British media have been treating the case with, as far as I'm concerned, a very one-sided view of everything and a very one-sided understanding of the evidence. The reporter writes, quote, "The McCanns returned to England bound by judicial secrecy, an official code of silence, which evidently did not apply to the Portuguese side who had leaked so much, including the names and contact details of all the McCann's holiday group to a friendly Portuguese reporter." Now, what's so crazy about this whole idea of the McCanns bound by judicial secrecy is you've just seen in the beginning of this clip the McCanns giving a press conference within days of the incident to a vast crowd of reporters. Does it look like they are bound by judicial secrecy? And so somehow this British writer has the temerity to put the whole thing of breaking the code of silence on the Portuguese, and he seems to have just developed amnesia in terms of all of these press conferences. And let's face it, far in advance of when the discovery was released in 2008, the abductor narrative had gone round the world thousands of times, thanks to all of these press conferences, blogs, and engagements with the media. And for all intents and purposes, hasn't that narrative ultimately stuck? Isn't that the narrative that still controls the story effectively today? Well, how do you think that could have happened? Well, this article might provide one clue to the notion that did it happen by accident or did it happen by design? And you can ask the exact same question in the John Benet Ramsey case. The paedophile abductor narrative, which wasn't the original narrative, how did that narrative come into being? By accident or by design? By a whole bunch of press conferences that eventually caught on in the public imagination. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. By the way, if you're seeing some footage on the ground, that is actually footage I took in 2019 when I was in Praia da Luz. So take note of that. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Going back to the article, soon after their return, at their invitation, that's quite important. At their invitation, I, this reporter, travelled to the McCann's home in Rothley, Leicestershire, and went to the pub with Jerry McCann, where we sat in a quiet corner and broke the secrecy code while he briefed me for 2 or 3 hours on what had really happened that night. Well, it wasn't a very brief briefing, was it? 2 or 3 hours talking to a reporter, actually in a place where other people could overhear them. What's also interesting with this whole idea of secrecy and secrecy code is the Portuguese media actually accused the McCanns and the Tapas group of a code of silence. So it's one thing to say that Portuguese authorities had a formula or a protocol, that's really the better word, a protocol for not talking about cases while they were under investigation, while you actually had a accusation, certainly, against the Tapas 9, the Tapas 7 plus the McCanns, that they had arranged within themselves to not talk to anyone as a group about what had really happened. And one idea, one thought that gave some meat, some reinforcement to this idea that this was going on was that the Ocean Club staff seemed to remember things differently to how the group seemed to say what they said and what they saw. And one of the members of that group, Jane Tanner, made a claim about actually seeing somebody walking with a child, and that actually sent the investigation in the wrong direction for 4 to 5 years. Something else just to note in terms of this article, where the writer writes, Jerry briefed me for 2 or 3 hours on what had really happened that night. Sorry, I don't know what this reporter is on about. He seems to be saying he was hand-selected by Jerry, who gave him the scoop of a lifetime. Think about this. This is one of the biggest stories in British history, British media history. And this guy is given the sort of mantle of, we're going to share our story with you. But the context is, at this point, the McCanns were actually Arguidos. They'd been made Arguidos in September 2007. And guess what the scoop was all about? Well, we didn't do anything. We're innocent. Madeleine was abducted, and we're going to tell you exactly how and why. A little like the Larry King interview with the McCanns, where they explain all the traits to follow in terms of that abductor. Anyway, he goes on to write, he took my notebook and drew a plan of the apartment showing the location and layout of the children's bedroom and how the abductor could have gone in and out unnoticed. Now, one wonders whether Jerry did the same thing when he was taken in for questioning. Was he as forthcoming to this journalist as he was to the police? In other words, did he also draw a map? Did he also talk to them for 2 to 3 hours? Or did he refuse to answer questions for 2 to 3 hours? And I think this makes one ponder, are journalists and reporters and news media, are they doing a public service, or are they part of really a scheme, someone's agenda, and they're happy to perform that agenda as long as they make some money out of it in terms of the sales of their media, and because there's a popular audience waiting on the other side. And of course, even if you have a good heart and good intentions, it's quite hard, I think, to see the truth if your paycheck depends on seeing things a certain way. The writer goes on to note, if people recognized Jerry in the pub, they left Jerry alone. His stress was evident. Well, I think it would be obvious that he'd be stressful because of the situation. They'd just been made suspects. And further, someone had noticed Jerry getting off the plane, and that, I think, was complicating things even further. But he wanted to talk, and afterwards took me home, where I waited in the kitchen for a taxi. Then he writes, Madeleine's star chart for going to sleep while at night was pinned to the fridge. Out of the entire article that this writer has written, I think that is perhaps the most important insight that he shares with us, and I don't think he even realizes the value of it. Why does Madeleine have a star chart for going to sleep if she didn't have problems going to sleep? I'm not going to take it further than that. I do want to just say that as far as I remember, and I haven't been able to find the source, I know the source exists, I've seen it before, I just haven't been able to track it down. There's an interview that one of Jerry's sisters, I think Philomena, gave, telling the British media that the shutters were jimmied, basically that they were interfered with or broken or maneuvered in a way. And that was something that I think happened the very next day, or the day after. That is how quickly the McCanns kind of inveigled themselves somehow into the media narrative. Family members giving insights into the investigation. And then you've got this person writing this article basically saying that in September 2007, he has a secret meeting where he discovers this abductor narrative. It's implied that this information came out for the first time, that someone broke their silence for the first time when it was there all along. Of course, in crime scene photos, the shutters aren't raised, aren't damaged, and have no one's fingerprints on them besides Kate's. But of course, that information would only come out something like a year later, and by then people had decided that the window was broken and the window was the point of egress. Interestingly, in her book, when dealing with the broken or unbroken shutters, she describes the lady who was dusting for fingerprints not covering her hair and dressed in plain clothes, possibly contaminating the scene. She, I guess, is the Linda Arendt of the Ramsey case. Quite an interesting observation, especially since Amaral would later debunk the scenario, saying there were no signs of forced entry. Where have we heard that before? Let me stress that again. There were no signs of forced entry and no signs of any intruder in the McCann holiday apartment. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.